cell theory is a bit of an overarching kind of concept to do with life, which helps us to explain life and its composition. So cell theory helps us to describe living things. So there's a few key points to do with cells and living things, which is wrapped up in kind of this banner of cell theory, which basically helps us describe life and the way life is composed and what it's made up of. So firstly, it states that all organisms are made up of at least one cell. So to be a living thing, it means you must be at least one cell. So you could be an individual cell, classed as a living thing, or a much larger organism made up of lots and lots of different cells, up to the trillions of different cells. Also, a cell is the simplest living unit. So a cell is kind of the smallest level we can go down to if we're looking at building blocks that we would term as being living things. So in order to be, or in order to go down to the smallest level of life, we can go down to something as small as a cell in order to describe the living components which make up different organisms, be that even a single cell in itself being an organism. So there's three key principles that are kind of described by cell theory, and this was termed a while ago, so in a moment I'll talk about kind of some updated versions of cell theory, or updated three principles or three things which define cells, and what is a cell and what cells do, very basically. So the first key principle is living things must be one or more cells. So a living thing must be one cell in size or more. So it must consist of at least one cell to be classed as a living thing. Secondly, all all cells, not living things, all cells arise or come from pre-existing cells. So in order to get a new cell, we must have an old cell in the first place which can divide, so this occurs as a result of division. But if we are to get a new cell, it must come from the dividing of an old cell. We can't just create cells out of thin air. They must come from an original cell in the first place, which is divided. Third key point, cells are important units of structure and function in organisms or living things. So cells are important in giving things a certain structure or shape, making certain things look the way that they do in particular organisms, particular living things, and they're also important units of function. So they're really important in ensuring that certain things take place the way that they need to. So some of those life processes like growth or like excretion of wastes or things like movement rely largely on the activity or action or function of cells. So the first person who kind of stumbled across, or someone with some intentions, I suppose, of coming across cells was someone called Robert Hooke. So talking about back in the 1700s, Robert Hooke was the first person to describe cells. So he was the first person that actually termed the word cell when talking about these particular units of life. So what Robert Hooke was doing was he was looking at a section of cork, which is made up of once living material, organic material. And what he noticed was under these kind of newly developed microscopes with this power to see things on a really small level, what he could see was this cork that he was looking at was divided up into little sections, a little bit like what I've just drawn there. And he likened them to the cells that monks lived in a monastery, so little kind of block type rooms similar to a jail cell. So this was when he first termed these cells, and these were later found out to be these small little units of life, small little living units, cells. Now, currently, cell theory has some sort of updates or added parts to it, which are built upon a little bit more extended knowledge or extensive knowledge than back in sort of the late 1700s. So currently we also talk about how energy flows within cells. So cells are able to transport and transform energy in different types within them in order to power certain things happening at a cellular level and then at a larger level inside organisms. Also, not only do cells arise from pre-existing cells, but DNA is passed on through cell division. So when cells divide, we now know that they also pass on their particular unique DNA with them. And also, all cells are composed or made up of similar chemicals. So the similar types of chemicals or similar types of combinations of chemicals that we can call macromolecules. These similar chemicals make up all cells. So all cells, even if they're quite different in appearance or structure or function, they're going to have a lot of similar elements within them. So there's the basics to cell theory.